By making use of our graphing calculator, we have come up with the scatter diagram of x versus y. Now let us take a look at these four models here. Let's discuss which one of them is going to provide for us a curve that is going to be a best representation of this set of scatter diagram. First, let us look at A. I will see this as one graph that is transformed from the graph of y is equal to x squared. And if I were to look at just this graph, y is equal to x squared, it is going to be a parabola that is going to pass through the origin. And a over here is given to us as a positive number, which means that this graph is going to be scaled by a factor of a parallel to the y-axis, and plus b is a positive number also, is going to cause this graph to be translated by b units in the positive x direction, which means that this graph here should look something that is like this. And this is not going to help us to simulate this set of scatter diagram. Let's move on. Let's look at B. B, I can see this as a transformed graph of y is equal to 1 over x squared. And this graph is going to look something like this, with a horizontal asymptote of y is equal to 0 and a vertical asymptote of x is equal to 0. And a, which is positive, is going to cause this graph to be scaled by a factor of a parallel to the y-axis, and b, which is also positive, is going to cause this graph to be translated by b units in the positive y direction, which means that this graph is going to be something that is like this, with a new horizontal asymptote of y is equal to b, and vertical asymptote remain the same as x is equal to 0. And this graph is not going to help us to simulate this too. Let's take a look at this. I think this is a little bit more potential, because if you were to just look at the graph of y is equal to ln 2x, this graph is going to look something that is like this, which gives us a shape that is almost similar to this. But let's take a look at the details. First of all, this graph here is going to have a vertical asymptote of x is equal to 0. And if it is times a, which means that this is going to be scaled by a factor of a, plus b, this is going to be translated by b units in the positive y direction, which means that the transformed graph of this graph is going to look something that is almost similar to this. So it will look something that is like this. It is shifted upwards by b units, and x is equal to 0 is still going to be the vertical asymptote. Although the shape is almost a good simulation of this, but we can see that this curve here is most likely going to pass through the y-axis. But this curve is not going to pass through the y-axis, since x is equal to 0 is the vertical asymptote. So we have one last choice. Let's analyze this last choice over here. This is a transformed graph of y is equal to square root of x. And if I were to just plot this graph using my calculator, I'm going to get a graph that is of this shape. A is going to cause this to be scaled by a parallel to the y-axis, and b is going to cause this graph to be translated by b units in the positive x direction, positive y direction, which means that I'm going to get a graph that is like this. Here is going to be b, because it is translated by b units in the positive y direction, and this curve is a very, very good simulation of the scatter diagram. That is why we will be choosing D as the most appropriate model.